Hi, everybody. This is Alex tonight. I'm the MC for tonight. We've got a rather thin crew tonight because I think there's a real dark weekend going on with the moon just barely coming up early in the morning. So there's lots to take pictures with, and a few of us are gone. But we've got Jaime at the controls, and Terry is monitoring us to make sure we do it all right. Gowry's here, and Eric is here to give our presentation tonight. Eric's going to be telling us about processing HO-RGB images. He's done a great job with them. He's got some to show you tonight. We kind of looked at them before the show, and they're pretty interesting. And so we'll get to see how he works his magic with that. Before we go and do that, though, I need to show you something. Where am I? I want the whole screen. Entire screen. There we go. I haven't done this in a while. And you should be seeing my whole screen as I get to see it for right now. The important things we want to show you are the calendar for the next couple of weeks. Today we've got Eric. Rod's coming back next week. He's going to be showing us some globular pictures he's took. And Craig Stocks, where he's going to be talking about automating post-processing, showing us how to put some routines together to get the most out of our imaging data. Gary, you remember he's got that catalog of all the objects he wants to take pictures of, and easy ways to find objects that you want to take pictures of tonight. And the next week, we're going to have some representatives from various clubs that have imaging groups of their own, special interest groups for imagers, and they're going to share what they do together, and maybe you'll get some ideas for what you can do in your own club to help the imagers get together and work on things. George is going to tell us about Focus, Focus, Hocus on Nina. He's going to tell us about some of the intricacies of that. And then for the next 3 days, and you can go down here for a while. I think there's somebody down there a little bit later. We don't have a lot going on, all right? And the way we get things to go on is we go to another part of our website, which is Contact, and you can fill in your name right there and all that other stuff, and you can tell us that you would like to do a presentation. And we'll swap some stories with you and ask you some things, and you'll tell us some things. It's not hard to qualify. I figure if you can watch the show and pay attention to kind of what we're talking about, you can actually do one of these presentations. You don't have to worry that it's been done before, because we've been doing this for 10 years. Out of 500 shows, we've done it before. Honest. There's stuff coming up new every month. There's something new to talk about, but there's also a lot of old stuff that people haven't quite gotten right. So you can come give your presentation on that. Anyway, hit the website, hit the contact button, tell us who you are, and tell us you'd like to do a show. One other thing, let's see that I don't cancel out my whole life here. There we go. Oh, I'm big in that picture. Over here, there's a place for you to put questions. And we really want some hard questions tonight, because it's fun to watch Eric try to explain stuff when we ask really hard questions. So please help me out. Ask some really, really hard questions. Meanwhile, Eric, if you could stop giggling and start presenting, go ahead.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Alex. Thank you for the introduction. And I have an image behind me, and it has nothing to do with the presentation tonight, but it's my favorite all-time image on AstroBin, and it's revealing the structure of the core of M31, an image I posted 2 years ago. It's done all in hydrogen alpha. And I just wanted to put it up just because I like the image, for no other reason. So let me scooch up here, get closer, block out the core of M31, and share my screen. Now, where's my little mouse? Click, click. Oh, there we are. Click the mouse. Share entire screen. Here we go. And we'll get the infinity screen. And Give me just a moment. Oh, there it is. PowerPoint. Okay. Processing HO-RGB images. These are some of the most beautiful objects and targets that we have in the sky. They have these beautiful reds and blues, and I think we really all like them. There are various ways that you can process them. You can process them in PixInsight, you can process them in Photoshop, in Pixel, whatever. And I'm going to present you my way of doing it. And I would say it's not the right way or the wrong way. It's just the way that I've developed over a number of years. So let me just read this little disclaimer off, because we all have a disclaimer. I saw a presentation a number of years ago at the Advanced Imaging Conference by a gentleman named Gabani, who's very famous in looking at galaxy streams. And he stood up there and he said, this is my way of doing it. It's not necessarily the right or the wrong way. This is just the way that I've developed over the years. And I don't remember anything else about his talk, but I remember that. So I'm going to put up the same disclaimer. And let me just read it. This is my current approach to processing HO-RGB images. Over the years, this process has evolved with growing experience, knowledge, better data, and improved processing tools. And it will undoubtedly continue to evolve. I primarily use PixInsight and Photoshop, each serving distinct purposes in my workflow. You might prefer one over the other, and that's perfectly fine. The techniques I share can be adapted to either program, well, most of them anyway. Remember, software are tools, not rules. Ultimately, I'm guided to a final image that pleases my eye, and I encourage you to do the same. So with that disclaimer, is there one more slide? Oh yeah, my images. My finished images are posted on Astrobin. There's the little link. I'm sure most of you are Astrobin users. You're welcome to download any of these images for your own enjoyment. If you want to use them for your own processing or some other site article presentation, just please ask my permission directly through a DM function with Astrobin. Occasionally, I also share my raw data for people who want to reprocess it because they perhaps don't have access to that target. So what did I say? Now let's start to process images. Let me close this. And the infinity. I love the infinity screen. And bring up PixInsight. PixInsight, the thing that we all start with. So I'm going to process 3 different images. All of them are HO-RGB. And again, there are various ways of doing it. And so these are my ways. So I'm not going to show you all the pre-processing steps except for a couple. So we're going to start out with 3 images. Let me just open up 3 of them. Let me navigate here. TAIC presentation. Pickering's triangle. Get rid of this guy. So the 3 images we're going to start with is the RGB image. Now this has been stacked, calibrated, background subtraction, and the other 2 images we're going to start with is the oxygen, the starless image, and the hydrogen starless image. Those are the 3. There's obviously a lot of work that went into this beforehand. So with the RGB image, I have one thing in mind. I don't care so much about the expression of the hydrogen structure or the oxygen. And you see with the HT default stretch, let me just make this big, that the stars are all blown out. And you can see the hydrogen and some of the oxygen, but it's not the kind of image that you want to present. So what I want to get out of this image is I just want to get star color. And we're going to get color from the hydrogen and the oxygen completely separately. So how am I going to stretch this? If I do a default stretch, you see all the stars are pretty much blown out. So we're not going to do that. So let's turn off the auto stretch. And I'm going to use a process which you have all heard about, but it has, I don't want to say a bad rep, but it just has some issues which people might object to. But we're going to use the arc-syn or the arc-sine stretch to get our star color, not to get the expression of the hydrogen alpha or the oxygen, but just to make sure we get nice stars. And I've got the stretch all the way to the right-hand side, and then I adjust the black point so that we don't have any overexposed pixels. And this is the stretch I'm going to use. And so let's implement the stretch. Turn off this and do the stretch. Drag the little caret over. So now we have nice, colorful stars. Now, I don't know any way else that you can get the kind of colored stars you can get with the arc-syn stretch. I see people that will use various other stretches, then they'll enhance the color and pixinsight. But this gives me the colored stars that I want. And I will get the expression of the hydrogen alpha and the oxygen 3 in Photoshop in just a minute. So the only thing I do want to do is I want to do the noise exterminator. Since this can be a little bit noisy, I'll just use RC's noise exterminator. And then one more. Let's just look at the histogram transformation, and I'll do a small adjustment on that. Here's my RGB. I might show you one thing before. Let's just back up. You see what happened when I did the noise reduction? That histogram got a lot narrower, and that was just getting rid of a lot of the noise in that image. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to clip off the lower where there's really no information and move the center point over. So now I got colored stars. I got a little bit expression of the hydrogen alpha, and you can even see some of the oxygen. And that's going to be a TIFF image. And I'm going to save that as a TIFF. File, save as. And the rest of the work is going to be done in Photoshop. Save it as a TIFF. And we're just going to write over those. 16-bit TIFF. And now we have our colored stars, a little bit of hydrogen alpha and a little bit of oxygen, but not as much as I really want. Yes.
Looks like we're going to a different stage pretty soon. So could I ask you some questions that have come up?
Sure.
Okay. John at Astro wants to know, why are we doing HO, not HOS? What, forgetting about the S2 channel?
Well, if you're going to go with an RGB image, really the colors that you want will just come from hydrogen and oxygen. If you're doing an HOS image, you're probably going to do a Hubble palette image. And that's another process. So I have also done Hubble palette images, but this is about HOS images, where they're really RGB images where we're enhancing the hydrogen and the oxygen. And remember, the sulfur is just a deeper red than the hydrogen, so it really doesn't add much to an RGB image.
Okay.
But you can certainly do it.
Okay. And Tarek has a question about the rig that he's planning on buying, but it's not really on topic. So we'll just hold off. If we get to it at the end of the day, we'll get to it at the end of the day.
Okay.
Okay.
So now we're going to stretch the hydrogen and the oxygen. And you know, the histogram transformation is perfect. You don't have to do anything. Let me just bring that up. I'll reset it. And I'm just going to implement the default screen transfer function. You know how to do this. I'm just going to drag it over here. and drag it onto the image, turn off the auto stretch, get rid of the noise. And then I'm just going to adjust this histogram a little bit since we got a lot of area with no information on it. Yeah, just clip that here. Adjust that center point. Adjust the center point just to kind of bring the histogram max about where it was before. It's just about the same place. And lots of detail in the hydrogen alpha, but no stars. So why do we do no stars? Well, you'll see in Photoshop why we do that, but the reason is we don't want the information from the stars to influence the RGB images. We just want the hydrogen alpha emissions to do that. So let me turn off the default. Do that adjustment. And now save that image as a TIFF. Starless TIFF. Save 16-bit. That's the second image we need. And the third one is the auction. We'll do exactly the same thing. We'll implement the default screen transfer function stretch. There it is. Turn off the auto stretch. Get rid of the noise. And do a small adjustment in the histogram. Yeah, it doesn't look like we have to do much of anything. I'm just going to leave that the way it is and save that as a TIFF. (16-bit). Done. Okay, before we move on to Photoshop, are there any questions about what I did in PixInsight? And I will just bop on over to Photoshop now.
There are not any questions directly about what you just did in Photoshop. Marcia wants to know if there would have been a benefit to linear fit the hydrogen alpha and O3.
Linear fit, no, it wouldn't.
Yeah.
You can do that, but there's really no benefit to linear fit, and there's no scientific logic that I know of to linear fit. The emissions from hydrogen alpha and oxygen are not the same, and I don't see any reason to match them up, and I don't think linear fit is the way to do it in any case. We are going to do some adjustments on the histogram, and when you do the default stretch, screen transfer function stretch, you're really doing a stretch which is in fact kind of matching them up, although not done with linear fit. Anyway, so let me open up those three images.
Okay.
I can navigate my way to that. Recurrence triangle. And I think it's these three right here. You can see I've done this before. Of course, I practiced. So here we have our RGB image, hydrogen alpha, and oxygen. So how do I add the hydrogen alpha to the RGB image? I'm just going to move this over to the other monitor so it's not blocking anything. And you see there's a little bit of poor alignment here. All the images weren't aligned perfectly. We're going to ignore that. And actually, we don't have to ignore it. There's a function. I don't know if I should do this. If everyone wants to cover their eyes for a moment, I'm going to use a function called, I could crop this. I'll use the spot healing. Again, close your eyes if you don't like to see this. Yeah, we've almost healed it. Okay, how do we add in the hydrogen alpha? So here's the hydrogen alpha over here. I'm going to do a little adjustment on the histogram. It's really done the same way as it's done in PixInsight in what's known as levels command. And let me move the level command over here. I'm just going to clip this a little bit because there's really no information here. And I'm going to use the healing brush to heal this over here. And if you want to know how this works, you'll have to look it up. So here's our hydrogen alpha. I'm going to make a copy of this. And I'm going to put it on top of the RGB image. No, that doesn't look like hydrogen alpha. What do I do now? Well, what color is this hydrogen alpha? Well, it's kind of a deep red, isn't it? So if we made this red and found a way to add it to the image below, we would highlight the emission of hydrogen alpha. The only catch is here, there's hydrogen beta. Now, I don't have a filter for hydrogen beta, but I do know that there's a fair amount of hydrogen beta where you have hydrogen alpha. So when I color this, I'm going to allow for what would be hydrogen beta if I had that filter. And hydrogen beta is blue, and hydrogen alpha is a deep red. So how am I going to color this? We have 3 channels here. And this little thing is a channel menu. And I'm going to take a black brush, make sure it's 100% black. And I'm going to grab this pencil and I'm going to color the green black because I don't want any black in hydrogen alpha. I'm going to paint it black. We don't want green. And blue, I told you there should be a little bit blue because even though I don't have a hydrogen beta filters, I do know that there's some hydrogen beta emissions. And I'm assuming that it's coming from the same area as the hydrogen alpha. That might not be a perfect assumption, but for the purpose of representation, I think it will give us an interesting result. And there probably is some truth to that as well. So I'm going to color that at, let's see, opacity at 50% black. You can't see it, but that up there, I've just changed it to 50%. And I'm going to paint over this. Yep, let's get it all. And now go back to the RGB. And I think that's the color that we would see from the hydrogen emissions for hydrogen alpha and hydrogen beta. But how do I blend that with the RGB image below? Well, what Photoshop will allow you to do is there are various blending modes. That is, how do I add this layer to the layer below it? And the mode I'm going to use is called lightning. And what does lightning do? Lightning says, if there's a brighter pixel in the lighten layer, which is this guy up here, this layer, then the layer below, it will substitute. If not, it'll leave it alone. So you can't see this, but I'm going to select the blend mode as being lightning. Oh my God, look at that. It just lit up all the hydrogen emissions. Just like that. I'm just going to take a moment to look at that. It also looks like I made a mess over here, but let me just turn off that layer. Yeah, we'll see that little blue stripe there. Now, how am I going to add the oxygen? Well, in kind of the same way, except with a different color. I'm going to take this. Let me adjust the histogram. We got a lot of gray in there I don't want. In the levels, I'm just going to clip that a little bit. I'm going to make a copy of this and cut and paste it. So there's our oxygen emission. Now we're going to color this differently than we did the hydrogen alpha. Well, by the way, let me just clear this little stripe over here. It's bugging me with the healing brush. Just heal that. There we go. So what color should this be? If this is a class, I'd ask the class, so what color is oxygen 3? And the answer would be kind of a greenish blue or bluish green, depending on how you want to say it. So if we're looking at the channels palette, what do? So we paint the red 100% black, because we know, change the opacity here to 100%. We don't want any red in here, so I'm going to paint the red black. Now we have the blue and the green. I can see this is a little green, so I'm going to paint the green about, let's paint it 40% black. I think that'll give us something that represents the color of the oxygen 3. Paint this 40%. So that means we got 60% green and 100% of blue. And I think that's about the right color for the oxygen 3 emissions. And you know what I'm going to do next. I'm going to go back to the layers palette, and I'm going to change this layer to, ta-da. And now we have our oxygen emissions. Now, a couple things I'd like to do. I see a little oxygen here, so I'm going to clip that. So I can go in and adjust this histogram. I'm going to clip that a little here, and I'm going to bring up and that's not our finished image, but we're not going to do any detailing on this. We're just going to have the RGB image, which we got from an ArcSign stretch. Now, one thing I can do, that little stripe on the right is bugging me. Let's just crop that off. Here we go. No, it's not bugging me. We got our RGB image. We added our hydrogen alpha. And we had our O3. And that's our image. It's probably a little too much blue here, but maybe that's just what the data tells us. So if I want to take care of that, let me see if I could just fuss with that a little bit. Now, what I'm doing now is just adjusting it so it fits my eye. I'm not making anything that I consider to be an accurate change in the image. So let's just take the levels and let's see if we just make this. No, I'm thinking making a mess. So let's not change it. But I'd probably go in there to maybe subtract out the background for the oxygen a little bit. Or maybe I could go in and change. Maybe I like that better. And there is your HO-RGB image by making an ArcSyn RGB to get star color, getting a starless HA and adding it in as a lightning layer after we darken certain parts of it, and doing the same thing with oxygen. So we have the hydrogen alpha, which is red with a little bit of deference to the hydrogen beta, and we have the bluish green of the O3. And that's our image. There might be a question or two now. Alex?
Yeah, just checking through the John. It says that in order to do what you're doing, you basically need there are 5 filters. You need the RGB, O, and H, A, right?
That's right.
Okay. And I wanted to know, why were you using the healing brush over there? You may have said it, only, I'm time confused here, watching 2 different shows at the same time. So uh, why did you clone or why did you healing brush that?
The healing brush in Photoshop is kind of like an AI function. It will take the surrounding area and substitute it for the area you want to heal. It is different than the clone stamp, which I think you can use in PixInsight, but the clone stamp just simply makes a copy of an area that you've selected. The healing brush takes the surrounding area and then substitutes it for it.
Yeah.
But in this case, I just clipped.
Okay.
I just cropped it.
Why did you need to do any of that? What was on the edge there that you wanted to fix?
Oh, the 5 filters weren't perfectly aligned for the RGB. So it probably,
you could have left it there and then clipped it off at the end, right?
Which is kind of what I did. I just clipped it.
And then you clipped it again. Okay, at the end.
Yeah,
okay.
I mean, I could have done this in PixInsight and re-registered it.
And Chris is back in the 60s. He saw a red channel and he wanted painted black. But anyway, we're here.
Oh, you mean it's the song, the Rolling Stones. For those of us that are old enough to remember the Rolling Stones.
Yeah. Now, that's it. We're finished.
No, that's not it. No, that's just number 1.
Yeah, no. That's it from what we got right up on
okay,
the
so I'm going to close this. If we have no more questions about this guy, yeah, we can save this one. I should have done a little more work on the action, but you get the idea. Yeah, I think that background could have been subtracted, but the process is the same. Okay, so let's go back to PixInsight. Now, this is an image where you have clearly distinct blues and reds for the hydrogen alpha and the oxygen, and they're separated. And in some ways, it's the easiest kind of HO-RGB image to work with, but not all of them are that way. In fact, aside from the supernova remnants where you have these little, wispy bits of blue and red, most of them are overlapping images. So let's do an overlapping images where we have HO data and RGB. And I think that's the next one. So let's open up. Again, I'll still take, let's see, 112. So let's open up the 3 images, you know what they are. So here are 3 images. Now let's stretch this. Now, once again, this is the RGB image of sharpless 112. And you do notice that all the stars are blown out. And if I just did a default STF stretch, I would have all white stars, which I don't want. And here you don't really see any representation of the blue from the oxygen because the H is just overwhelming. But let's do the same thing we did before. Let's turn this off. Go to the arc sin stretch. By the way, I guess I always called it the arc sine stretch. I don't know, it's from geometry in high school, but it's the arc sin stretch, according to Molly. So let's put up the default here, estimate the background, and we'll get rid of all this red thing, which is going to be at a complete black, which we don't want. And I'm going to move the slider over so we just get rid of all those little red speckles, which were absolute black. And in any of your images, if your background is absolute black, you've probably done something wrong, because the background from our places on Earth is never black. So that's a nice star color image, and we see some red as well. So I'm going to save that. We have nice blue and orange and red stars. I'm going to do a noise extermination. Oh, I love these functions. It takes a couple of seconds. I'm going to bring that up, and I think we're going to do a small adjustment on the histogram. Let's just bring up the preview and draw this slide over, not so it's absolutely black, don't want that, but about here, and then brighten it up so that the peaks approximately match. See that? At least that's what I like to do. And that's our RGB image, and you can see plenty of red. Let's implement that. And let's save that as a TIFF file. Save as. Save that as a TIFF. (16-bit). Don't save it as a 32-bit. Photoshop won't like that. Well, here's the oxygen. You can see the oxygen is much, much dimmer than the hydrogen alpha, but we would like to represent it in some way. By the way, if you remember, there was a nice bright star down here, and even with the star exterminator, there can be a little bit of star residue left. And if you want to see what the healing brush will do, I'll show you in a minute. It'll get rid of that perfectly. So I'm just going to implement the STF, screen transfer function. Get this out of the way. Come on, move it. Turn off the auto stretch. Get rid of some of the noise. And we need to adjust that histogram. I'm going to clip it a little bit. I would like that a little bit darker. I think that's okay. So now we have the O3 emission, and I'm going to save as a TIFF. Yes, this is getting a little redundant, but that's how you learn things, by repetition. Starless TIFF. Save 16-bit. Yes, I want to close that. And you know what we're going to do for the hydrogen alpha? Much stronger emission. Auto stretch, the STF, reduce the noise. And let's see if we want to adjust the histogram a little bit. Yeah, I think so. Just clip that a little bit. That is bright, isn't it? And let's save that as a TIFF. So now we have our three files. We have the RGB, we have the hydrogen alpha, and we have the oxygen. So we cruise on over to Photoshop. our sharpless, and open those three up. Now, once again, there's nothing wrong with this image. We can see the red emission. In fact, if you look closely in here, you can see this little bluish color. That's the oxygen emission, but it's really not represented, and the detail in the hydrogen alpha isn't represented well either. So let's represent these. I'm going to adjust the histogram on this just a little bit. It's pretty bright. Yeah. Make a copy of it. Put it on to the RGB. You know what happens next. You go into the channels. We want to leave the red as it is. We want to paint the green as being black. No, not that. We want black. And for the blue, once again, to represent the hydrogen beta, I'm going to make it 50% black. So we have some of the representation of the hydrogen beta as being blue. And now we're going to blend that into the layer below in terms of lightning. Once again, the lightning says if you have a brighter pixel in the layer above, change it out. And if you don't, leave it alone. So now we have a representation of the hydrogen alpha. And it just looks like you shine a big red spotlight on it. Now, at this point, you might say, well, you know, is that what it really looks like? There was a friend of mine a long time ago, when asked that question, he said, if you were in space and you were standing right next to that, you wouldn't see a darn thing. And that's true. So we're just having a representation, in effect, a mapping of these colors in order to get an image which in some ways represents the image. For example, the Hubble Space Telescope, those images are all mapped images. They aren't necessarily the colors of the filter. They're mapped to a certain color, and that's effectively what we're doing. If you look at James Webb, they're all infrared. None of those colors we can see. They're all mapped colors. They're all representations of the image in order to point out certain characteristics. In this case, to point out the hydrogen that exists and the emissions that come from that hydrogen. So now let's do the oxygen. That's pretty darn dim, isn't it? Well, we're going to do it anyway, because we want a little bit of oxygen representation, even if it is dim. And I'm going to paste it onto the RGB image. I'm going to go into the channels. I'm going to paint the red 100% black. And I'm going to paint the green 40% black. And that should give me the blue-green of the oxygen emission. There's our blue-green. Go into the layers palette, make this a lightning layer. And it isn't very dramatic, but these are all overlapping images. That is, the oxygen is mixed in with the hydrogen alpha. And in some ways, you know, it kind of masks it, but this is a representation of the data. I can go in here and I can let's say, for example, I want to perform a little magic in here. And let's say I think there should be a better representation of this. Now, again, for those of you that are uncomfortable with doing these kinds of things, you can just close your eyes, no problem. I'm just going to select that portion of it. I'm going to feather that selection by 200 pixels. I'm going to hide the marching ants. I don't like the marching ants. That's that little line around that. And I can go in here and I can bring up that portion of the oxygen emission. And the answer is, I don't like that. So we're not going to do it. So this is our RGB. Here's the blue. You see it is blue, but it's really masked by the red emission, but it's an HO-RGB image. Are there any questions at this point, Alex?
Yeah, we've got just one question, but I was going to wait to see what the next segment was about. Taryn wants to know, will there be a demo with continuum subtracted H and O and RGB?
Continuum subtracted.
I was working that in my brain too. I couldn't figure that one.
Well, no, if continuum subtracted. In this case, because we have stretched out the hydrogen alpha to such a dramatic degree, the continuum subtraction really won't yield that much. It won't yield a different image. If you look back at the image you saw in the beginning where I did the unveiling of the structure of M31 and hydrogen alpha, that was done with continuum subtraction. So I could only exclusively look at the HA. But in this case, the R is just a component of the H-alpha, and the H-alpha is really dominant. If we just did an HO image, just combine those two, we would get fundamentally the same image as we have here. And doing a continuum subtraction really doesn't yield that. Now, if on another time we want to show continuum subtraction in an area where it really matters, we should do that. For example, continuum subtraction is worthwhile if you're doing galaxy and you want to represent the hydrogen alpha, and you want to make sure that there's no red from the galaxy that's interfering with the relatively dim emissions of hydrogen alpha in small emission nebula in the galaxies. And I think that would be a legitimate way of doing it. As far as emission nebulas themselves that are really bright red, I don't think it adds anything to it. Now, if I were to go further, which I don't think we have time for, I would do some detailing on that. And the kind of detailing that I might do, let me just give a short demo on that, is to take the hydrogen alpha, and I'm just going to paste a couple of layers on top of that. Let's just do 3. And this is really another demo, but we would do something called high pass filtering. Turn these layers off. And let's zoom in on. And again, this is refining. It's not really a demo. But if I wanted to emphasize this area in here, I might put in what's known as a high pass filter. So let's filter other high pass. So let's put in a 4-pixel high pass filter. And I'm going to overlay that on top of it. And that's going to bring out a little detail on some of the fine structures. I don't know if that comes across, but if I put in 3 or 4 high pass filters, and I would probably blur that just a little because it brings out some of the noise. I could bring out a little bit more of the detail of the nebula. But that's something else. That probably doesn't come across. Let's just zoom in. We're really seeing all the. We're not demonstrating high pass filtering right now. That's something else.
And John wanted to say that some of this could probably be done in pixel math, except that you guys have to understand Eric grew up with Photoshop. So this is how he does it.
Well, here's what I would say. What was the second slide I presented? These are tools, not rules.
Yeah.
If you're more comfortable with pixel math and some of the functions within PixInsight, that was fine. I've done 30 years of Photoshop, and visual representation and visual adjustment on images works best for me. Could you do the same thing by using this as a lightning layer? By taking the RGB image and putting in the hydrogen alpha as a lightning layer? Sure. You just have to write the pixel math formula or get someone that has already written it and you can just add it in. But I would say you don't have the subtlety of adjustment. For example, again, I'm not arguing against doing this with PixInsight. If you're comfortable with PixInsight, then do it with PixInsight. But this is pretty easy. So if I want to adjust how much lightning this is done, there's a little slider right here. And I can just say, okay, this is a little too much. I only want it 50%. That's good enough for me.
It's a lot easier to work out the percentage when you're actually watching them on the screen.
You're watching the representation. And again, tools, not rules. And I know in this astrophotography environment, I think people view PixInsight as a rule, not a tool. I view it as a tool. And there's some things that it does that is absolutely no other program can do. All the pre-processing, all the stacking, gradient removal, noise reduction, all those kinds of things. That's PixInsight. I don't have a better way of doing it. By the way, if you haven't tried this yet, I used to do gradient removal with DBE, and I think I got fairly adept at it. And now there's this program called Graxpert, and I have no idea how it works, but it does a great job of removing gradients. And in fact, we should get someone from Graxpert to come on and show us how that works. That's supposed to be an AI tool, not a rule. And I now use Graxpert for most of my gradient removal, and I used it for this one as well.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Now you've got another example to show us.
I do if we have the time. Do you want to do it? It's kind of like this one. It's up to you.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, let's go.
Okay, hang on one second. I figure after I've done it twice, people will say, I've seen that, you know. Why are you doing that again? Let's go back to PixInsight. And what's our third example? Third example is, one of my favorite images. Okay, sing along with what I'm doing. You know where we go next. We open up the RGB image. Here's what it looks like auto-stretched. All the stars are blown out. We're not going to do that. We'll zip through this quickly. Turn off the auto-stretch. Open up the arc sin or arc sign. Get rid of all these little red speckles, which means it is in black. We don't want that. We don't want our background to be black. Just going to move the slider so all these greens, and there we go. Hey, not a bad image, really. Oh, I always like the tulip. not to brag on myself, but I have an APOD with one of the earlier images of the tulip. We're going to exterminate the noise. I'm going to bring this up. RGB image. I'm not going to do anything with that. I like it just the way it is. Good histogram, everything's matched up. The red is a little stronger, as you would expect. It's an emission nebula. But it's hard to see any blue, but I can tell you in this area in here, there is a lot of hydrogen or oxygen 3 emission. And if you just did this stretch, no matter how you mucked around with it, you wouldn't see much. But this image by itself is not a bad image. Save as. Oh, this is one of the overlapping images, by the way, where the oxygen overlaps, but not completely. So if now let's do the hydrogen alpha. Now, if this was a class, I would say, okay, what am I doing next? Oh, look at all those emissions. Beautiful. And no stars. Default STF stretch. Do the stretch. Turn off the auto stretch. Get rid of some of the noise. Adjust the histogram. Do I have to adjust this histogram? Maybe a little bit. Let's turn on the preview. Let's click that. Let's move it so they're pretty much overlapping, just a little broader. Oh, I love these emissions. And now let's save that as a TIFF. Starless TIFF. I'm just going to leave that up rather than closing it out. Let's bring up the oxygen. And you can clearly see the position of the oxygen emission is different and emphasizes different structures within this nebula. You can also see there's a residual star, because that star was really bright. So let's close this, do an STF stretch on the oxygen 3. Turn off the auto stretch, get rid of some of the noise. And I'm just going to do a, whoops, let's reset that histogram. Okay, there's our oxygen. Save as. Now I might do a little cleanup on this, but that's a different process. Let's just do the down and dirty. 16-bit. Save the TIFF. Close the window. Go to Photoshop. And let's open up these 3 images. Nebula. I don't know why Windows does this. Should be in detail. Oh, there's one more. Let me just point out one thing in case you don't do it. You want your image to be represented on any screen that it goes to, provided you have a well-calibrated screen. And to do that, you have to set a profile. And right now, this is the sRGB 1966 profile. I kind of like another profile, the Adobe RGB. I think it's a little broader profile. And you see there is a difference. The reds are a little redder and the background's a little darker. So be sure to assign a profile to your RGB images, whether you do it in PixInsight or whether you do it in Photoshop. And I think by default that PixInsight uses the sRGB profile, but you can set that yourself. If you don't select the profile, then whoever represents that image on a screen will use the default screen profile, which may not represent it the same way that you have. Okay, so now we have, and again, not a bad image, lots of colored stars. We can see the Tulip Nebula. So let's add our hydrogen. Now that's a little bright. I think we're going to lower that a little bit because I know what it's going to do once we get in there. I'm just going to set the black point a little bit down, make it a little more subdued by making it a little less bright. Make a copy of that. Again, you know the drill. Paste it. Make sure I have black selected, which I do. Go to the channels, color the green 100%. Here's my paintbrush. Why do I do that, Eric? Let's set it at 100%. Color it black. And then I'm going to color the blue at 50% to represent the hydrogen beta. You can't see the numbers up there. I'm just changing the opacity to 50%. Here's a representation of the hydrogen emission. And now I'm going to change it to a, oh, I can't hear anyone, lightning layer. I can't read it, but I'm going to select the blend mode as being lightning. And there we have our tulip. And you know, I think that's kind of bright. So I'm going to go in there and change that. I'm going to say, and again, this is something that's real easy to do in Photoshop. I'm going to change it. I think that's bright enough. That still shines a nice bright light on that. And now let's add our blue. Boy, there's a lot of background that. See that little guy right there? That's a star residue. And I'm going to unlock this layer. Let's make a copy of it. And I'm going to select the healing brush, spot healing brush. And again, if you don't like me doing this, you can look away. Hold on. Now I'm going to adjust the levels. And I'm going to copy my oxygen 3. Put it on top here. And I'm going to color it so that it represents a blue-green. Color the red 100%. Repetition is how we learn things. or the green at 50%. There's our blue-green oxygen. Make that a lightning layer. That's how we're going to blend it. And now, look how nicely the oxygen is represented. If it doesn't come across, this whole area in here is oxygen emissions. And without doing that, let me just put these in a folder and turn them off. Oh, you know, looks like I missed something down here. Look at that. Eric, you goofed. Look at that. You goofed. See, I didn't paint that nicely. Bad, Eric. There we go. Now I'm going to put these two layers in a folder. And I'm going to turn them off and turn them on. And now we see the hydrogen emissions very distinctly, and we see the oxygen emissions. And I think we're going to turn up the hydrogen emissions. I think I was a little too hasty with that. Let's turn that up to 75%. And this is an example of an overlapping hydrogen and oxygen 3 emission, and a nebula that has both of those, as opposed to the triangle where they were quite distinct and perhaps a little easier to work with. That's my third example. That's really all I got. Any questions? Alex, are you there?
Hello. I think I muted myself. Hello. Yeah, we got the questions, Eric. We got them in there. So we did a good. Do you want to say anything about the true color of hydrogen alpha? A lot of people say it's that deep red that you've got here. Some people say it's bubblegum pink.
I've never tried bubblegum pink. Hydrogen alpha is a deep red, but I'm saying that for my purposes, I assume that there's hydrogen beta being emitted with the hydrogen alpha. And even though I don't have a hydrogen beta filter, that I want to represent it by putting in a little bit of blue color where I know hydrogen emissions exist. And if I had a hydrogen beta filter, perhaps I would do it directly, but I don't. You may do it differently. If you wanted to make it bubblegum, that's fine with me. But if you just do an RGB image, this is the color of it. This is the RGB color. It's kind of deep red, isn't it? So bubblegum would be fine. Again, it's
okay.
These are tools, not rules. It's how it looks to your eye.
Thank you very much for reminding us that Photoshop is a very powerful tool that more of us should be using, because it does some things much more easily than PixInsight does. How much of this is available to those of us who still have, my Photoshop is from before the subscription came along.
You can actually, what is the other program, the free program, which is similar to Photoshop?
GIMP?
GIMP. GIMP will do most of these things that Photoshop will do it, but you have to learn how it does it. But you can, it has layer control, it has percentages, it has painting of the channels. It has a lot of tools in there. GIMP is kind of the Photoshop version of, what's the automation software that everyone's using now, the free one? Remind me. Nina. So I would say Nina is the free version of automation and GIMP is a free version of Photoshop. So if you like to do things visually, which I do, and you want to use a pixel program where you can visually see it, go get GIMP. I think I've used GIMP before. It's fine. I've just been using Photoshop for 30 years, so it's kind of second nature to me.
I didn't see you using anything tonight that I don't have in my version of Photoshop, which is, like I said, pre-subscription.
Yeah, probably. If you have version 6, you could do everything I see here. It has all the blend modes. Everything. There's nothing I'm doing which is particularly difficult. It probably doesn't have like the magic wand and a few other things, and it doesn't have the AI tools, but so what? There's other ways of doing that.
Okay.
GIMP.
Well, thank you, Eric. That brings us to a close for tonight. Thank you, Jaime, for making sure it all ran right. And Terry for supervising that part of it and everything else. So we're good. We'll see you again. We'll see you again next week. Welcome. Come on back to the Astro Imaging channel. And don't forget, we need presenters. So if you've got something you'd like to tell people about, bring it to us, okay? Thanks. You can go ahead and take us out, Jaime.